Marcus Reed walked into class, expecting another ordinary day, until his teacher pointed at him with a smirk and said, "Why don't you solve this? Let's see if you're as smart as you think." The whole room erupted in laughter, phones already recording his failure. But when Marcus picked up the chalk, what happened next silenced everyone. It exposed something much darker than a math problem. So why did one joke nearly tear an entire school apart? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The hum of the overhead lights in Jefferson High's math classroom was broken only by the scrape of chairs and the low chatter of restless juniors. It was fourth period, the time of day when attention was hard to hold, and Mr. Carter knew it. He had always relied on sarcasm, little jabs, and sometimes cruel humor to keep control of the room. Today, though, his eyes found a target he couldn't resist. Marcus Reed sat in the third row, his notebook open, pages filled with meticulous notes and numbers. At 16, Marcus had learned to keep his head down, to appear invisible in spaces where being noticed often meant trouble. His dark skin, his quiet nature, and his sharp mind made him stand out in ways his teachers rarely acknowledged positively. He wasn't a class clown, nor an athlete who drew admiration in the hallways. He was just Marcus, the kid most teachers assumed would scrape by, never quite expecting excellence from him. Mr. Carter turned back to the board, chalk in hand, and scrawled a lengthy calculus equation across the green surface. It was one he knew half the class hadn't even seen before, a problem that required knowledge from chapters they hadn't officially covered yet. The numbers stretched like a puzzle designed to intimidate. He paused, letting the silence linger, then scanned the room. "All right," Carter drawled, his voice dripping with mock encouragement. "Who thinks they're brave enough to take this one?" His gaze flicked across the rows of students slouching in their seats. A few avoided eye contact, while others smirked at the impossibility of the question. Then Carter's eyes landed back on Marcus. The teacher's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "Marcus," he said, his voice suddenly sharper, "why don't you come up and solve this for us?" For a moment, the room froze. Heads turned in unison, eyes widening. Some students exchanged quick glances, their mouths twitching with anticipation. A ripple of laughter broke the silence, low at first, then louder. One boy at the back whispered, "This is gonna be good," as he pulled out his phone already recording. Marcus's chest tightened. He hadn't volunteered, he hadn't raised his hand, yet here he was, singled out, not because Carter believed in his ability, but because he didn't. The teacher's tone had carried something more than casual challenge. It carried expectation of failure. Marcus looked down at his notebook, trying to steady his breath. His pencil rested in his hand, its eraser worn flat from overuse. He thought about keeping still, about pretending he hadn't heard, but the laughter, the way it cut into him like a blade, made silence impossible. Carter tapped the chalk impatiently against the board. "Come on now," he said, his voice taking on a sing-song mockery. "Show us what you've got. Unless, of course, you're not ready for this kind of work." The insinuation was clear. Someone like Marcus wasn't capable. Not in this subject. Not at this level. Not in front of these students. A girl in the front row covered her mouth, whispering to her friend, "Why'd he call on him? That's just mean." But her whisper only fueled the smirks, spreading across the room. Another student muttered, "Bet he can't even start it." Marcus swallowed hard. His legs felt heavier than they should, as he pushed his chair back. The screech of metal against the linoleum floor echoed too loud, drawing more attention than he wanted. His heart pounded, each beat making his ears ring. He stood slowly, clutching his pencil like it was a lifeline, though he wouldn't need it at the board. The walk to the front of the classroom felt longer than it was. Every step carried the weight of expectation. Expectation that he would embarrass himself, that he would confirm the stereotypes floating just beneath the laughter. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, "Don't let them tell you what you can't do, Marcus. Show them." He reached the board, staring at the wall of numbers before him. The equation loomed larger now, chalk lines slanted but deliberate, daring him to try. The smell of dust from the chalk tray filled his nose, sharp and dry. He flexed his fingers once, twice, as if loosening them for a performance. Behind him, the room buzzed with anticipation. Phones were angled discreetly, or not so discreetly, catching every second of the scene. The air was thick with the weight of assumption. To them, this was entertainment. A setup for failure. Carter leaned casually against his desk, arms folded, watching. His eyes held a glint of satisfaction, as though he had already secured the ending he wanted. He had played this game before, choosing students he thought were weak to prove a point, to show dominance. But this time was different. This time it wasn't just about control. It was about putting Marcus in his place. Marcus lifted the chalk. It was shorter than he expected, rough against his fingertips, leaving faint white dust on his skin. His hand trembled, the chalk tapping once against the board before he steadied it. For a heartbeat he did nothing, only stared at the problem as the whispers grew louder. "Come on, Reed," someone called from the back. "Don't freeze up now." "But he doesn't even know the first step," another voice added. The laughter stung, but beneath the sting, something sparked. Marcus wasn't just standing in front of numbers. He was standing in front of years of doubt, of teachers who never called on him unless it was to prove what he couldn't do. He thought of his mother's sacrifices, of the late nights he spent teaching himself material from library books and online tutorials because no one expected him to be more than average. He had been invisible long enough. He inhaled slowly, letting the air fill his lungs. His eyes traced the problem again, piece by piece, and in that moment, the noise behind him faded, the laughter blurred. The phone's recording no longer mattered. There was only him and the equation. The chalk met the board, steady this time. A line, a number, a symbol. The first step carved into the green surface. Silence rippled across the room as students leaned forward, realizing he hadn't frozen, he hadn't stumbled. He had started, and not only had he started, he was right. For the first time that day, the room went still, the laughter caught in throats. Even Carter's smirk faltered, his head tilting slightly, as if to question what he was seeing. Marcus didn't look back. His hand hovered for the next move, his mind racing faster than his nerves. The dust of the chalk clung to his fingertips, as the unfinished equation stretched ahead of him, waiting. But the hardest part wasn't starting. It was whether he could finish. Marcus stood at the board, chalk poised for the next step. Behind him, the silence was heavier than the laughter had ever been. Every student, every camera, every whisper waited to see whether he would rise or collapse under the weight of expectation. The silence in the classroom pressed against Marcus's back as he held the chalk, hand trembling. For the briefest moment, time seemed to pause, the weight of every eye, every camera, every breathless whisper hanging in the air. Yet before the next mark could be made on the board, his mind carried him elsewhere, into the world that had shaped him long before this humiliating challenge. Marcus Reed had always lived in the shadow of being underestimated. His life, shaped by quiet sacrifice, began every morning in a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. The peeling paint on the walls and the faint smell of the laundromat downstairs were familiar to him, as ordinary as the sound of his mother's alarm clock ringing before sunrise. Angela Reed was a woman defined by resilience. At 38, she worked 2 jobs, day shifts at a grocery store, night shifts cleaning offices downtown. The weight of exhaustion was etched into her face, but her spirit refused to break. Every morning, she would set a plate of eggs and toast in front of Marcus, urging him to eat while she slipped on her faded work uniform. She believed fiercely and unshakably that her son was destined for more. "You're not just smart, Marcus," she would say, leaning down to press a kiss against his forehead. "You're special. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise." But believing it and living it were 2 different things. At school, Marcus learned early that expectations were uneven. Teachers smiled at students like Ethan, his best friend, assuming greatness before it was ever proven. Ethan was smart too, but the difference was in how they were treated. When Ethan made a mistake, it was brushed off as a slip. When Marcus stumbled, it was seen as evidence of limitation. In 5th grade, Marcus remembered raising his hand eagerly during a math quiz review. The teacher, Mrs. Langley, had skipped over him 3 times before finally sighing and calling his name. He gave the correct answer immediately, but instead of praise, he got a skeptical nod. Later, when Ethan offered the same type of answer to a similar problem, Mrs. Langley beamed. "See, class? That's how you think like a mathematician." Moments like that piled up like bricks, silent walls built around Marcus's confidence. He never forgot them. At home, the walls of his bedroom told a different story. They were lined with library books, many borrowed so often that librarians knew him by name. He had taught himself pre-calculus the summer before sophomore year, not because a teacher encouraged him, but because he wanted to see if he could. Online forums became his classroom. Videos of university lectures became his teachers. Angela noticed the effort. Sometimes she would come home past midnight, her hands raw from scrubbing floors, and peek into Marcus's room. She'd see him hunched over a textbook, headphones in, lips moving silently as he worked through a proof. She never disturbed him. She simply watched, her eyes watering, because she knew what he was fighting against. The contrast between home and school grew sharper each year. In school, Marcus blended into the background, never invited into honors clubs or academic competitions, even though his test scores qualified him. Teachers didn't say it outright, but their actions spoke clearly. They did not expect brilliance from him. At home, his mother expected nothing less. Ethan noticed it too. One afternoon in freshman year, after math class, Ethan shoved his hands into his hoodie pocket and muttered, "You know, it's messed up the way Carter talks to you." Marcus glanced at him, shoulders tight. "What do you mean?" "Come on, man," Ethan replied. "He calls on you only when he thinks you'll mess up. He asks me questions all the time like he wants me to shine. You? He just waits for you to fall." Marcus had shrugged it off, though the truth of it stung. "It's whatever," he'd said, masking the frustration. But Ethan had shaken his head, a look of guilt flickering across his face. "It's not whatever. It's not right." Friendship with Ethan had always been steady. They met in middle school during a science fair, bonding over a shared interest in building a makeshift robot from scrap parts. Ethan's family lived in a nicer part of town, in a house with a yard and working air conditioning. When Marcus visited, he couldn't help but notice the ease with which Ethan's parents praised him, or how teachers at their shared school events always remembered Ethan's name first. Still, Ethan never treated Marcus like he was lesser. He joked with him, studied with him, defended him in subtle ways when classmates tried to make Marcus the butt of their jokes. But no matter how loyal Ethan was, Marcus knew the world treated them differently. The imbalance grew heavier as Marcus excelled privately. He solved problems Ethan admitted he couldn't touch. He drafted essays that left teachers surprised he'd written them. Yet still, recognition came slow, if at all. Angela carried the same wounds. At her grocery store job, she was passed over for promotions in favor of younger, less experienced white employees. When she spoke up, she was told she wasn't a team fit for management. She never told Marcus directly, but he overheard once, catching her voice breaking over the phone to her sister. "I won't let them do to him what they've done to me. I won't." Her fight became his fight, though Marcus never said it aloud. The weekend before Carter's cruel joke, Marcus had stayed up until 3 a.m., working through practice problems far beyond the syllabus. He wasn't preparing for any class assignment, he was preparing for himself. For the idea that one day, someone might notice, that one day, he might get the chance to prove he wasn't invisible. But when the chance finally came, it wasn't the kind he imagined. Back in the classroom, the board loomed like a test not just of knowledge, but of identity. The equation was more than numbers. It was a challenge wrapped in ridicule. The laughter still echoed faintly in Marcus's ears, even though silence had now overtaken the room. He thought of his mother, her hands raw but her voice fierce. "Don't let them tell you what you can't do, Marcus." He thought of Ethan, shaking his head and saying, "It's not right." He thought of every skipped hand raise, every skeptical look, every backhanded remark disguised as casual classroom humor. All of it pressed into this single moment. His fingers tightened around the chalk. He felt the tremor in his hand, the weight of history pushing against him. Behind him, he could sense Carter's eyes, expectant, almost eager to see him falter. The students leaned forward in their seats, cameras steady, waiting to capture the collapse. But Marcus didn't move yet, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he understood the stakes. This wasn't just a math problem. This was the stage where his world before, the invisibility, the overlooked brilliance, the struggles at home, collided with the storm waiting ahead. The chalk hovered, the silence grew heavier. And then, with every ounce of courage he had gathered from years of being underestimated, Marcus pressed the chalk against the board. The first number appeared clearly, but his hand shook violently, the chalk dragging unevenly across the surface. Students inhaled sharply. To them it looked like hesitation. To Marcus, was the fight of his life, and it was only beginning. The chalk's tip trembled against the board, dragging a faint, uncertain line before Marcus could steady it. The weight of 30 pairs of eyes pressed on him like an iron cage. Every second he hesitated became fuel for the audience behind him, an audience that wanted him to fail. The first laugh cracked the silence. It came sharp, nervous, then spread like a spark through dry grass. "He's frozen," a boy near the window whispered, his voice louder than he realized. Another voice chimed in, dripping with mockery. "That he doesn't even know where to start." The class tittered, the laughter small but cruel, designed to sting. Phones rose higher into the air, their little red recording lights capturing every twitch of his hand, every bead of sweat forming on his forehead. Marcus could almost feel the heat of the cameras burning holes in the back of his neck. Mr. Carter leaned lazily against his desk, arms folded, his lips curved into a satisfied smirk, the expression of a man who believed he had orchestrated a perfect humiliation. Then, turning slightly toward Miss Harris, the substitute teacher who sat at the corner shuffling papers, he whispered with deliberate softness, "Watch this. He'll fold in less than a minute." The words weren't meant for Marcus, but they weren't meant to be hidden either. They were stage directions in a play Carter had written long before Marcus stood at the board. The room responded with muffled chuckles, nods, and the kind of cruel anticipation that thrives on seeing someone stumble. Marcus's heart thudded hard against his ribs. He gripped the chalk tighter, feeling its brittle surface threaten to snap under his fingers. His throat tightened, dry as if dust had lodged inside. He could hear his mother's voice somewhere in the back of his mind. Soft, firm, insistent. "Don't let them tell you what you can't do, Marcus." But it was drowned out by the noise behind him. The laughter was too familiar, too sharp. His mind flickered back, unbidden, to memories carved into him long before this moment. He was 8, sitting in second grade with his hand raised high for what felt like forever. The math problem was subtraction, with borrowing, a skill his mother had drilled into him with flashcards at the kitchen table. He waved his hand with excitement, until finally, reluctantly, the teacher, Donovan, sighed and called his name. Marcus answered quickly, correctly, but instead of praise, she frowned. "Lucky guess," she muttered before calling on another student. The class laughed. The sting of that moment had never left him. Years later in middle school, he worked on a science fair project with 2 classmates. He had built the entire experiment at home, tinkering with wires and circuits until it worked. On presentation day, when the teacher asked for an explanation, his partners fumbled through half answers. Marcus tried to speak up, but Mr. Howard cut him off. "Good effort, Marcus, but let's let the stronger presenters handle it." Stronger. That word had burned deep. Stronger meant louder. Stronger meant Now, standing in front of Carter's class, the sting of those microaggressions returned in full force, fresh as new wounds. He wasn't just fighting a math problem, he was fighting every doubt, every dismissal, every smirk that had told him he didn't belong. The whispers swelled behind him. "He's stuck. He can't do it. What did you expect?" Marcus's chest rose and fell, faster now. He wanted to turn, to snap back, to defend himself. But he knew the fight wasn't with words. His only weapon was the chalk in his hand. He inhaled, steadying himself. Slowly he traced the first line on the board, his handwriting careful, deliberate. The numbers appeared clean, precise. The room hushed slightly. A girl in the front row tilted her head. "Wait," she murmured to her neighbor. "That's right." The whisper carried further than she intended. A ripple of uncertainty spread across the class. The laughter, once loud, softened into murmurs of confusion. Carter's smirk faltered, his brow furrowed ever so slightly, as he leaned forward in his chair, eyes narrowing on Marcus's work. Marcus didn't turn. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He pressed forward, completing the first step of the solution with quiet certainty. The chalk squeaked faintly against the board as he underlined his work, the sound slicing through the silence. For the first time since standing up, Marcus felt his shoulders loosen just a fraction. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had shifted into something else, something sharper, steadier. He had struck his first blow, not against the equation, but against the weight of their assumptions. Behind him, the whispers fell into silence. No laughter, no jokes, just the uneasy realization that the story unfolding before them wasn't the one Carter had promised. But Marcus knew better than to relax. One correct step didn't erase the years of being overlooked, nor the expectation of failure still hanging heavy in the air. The room hadn't decided to believe in him yet. They were waiting for him to trip, to falter, to confirm what they wanted to believe. He clenched the chalk, his jaw tight. The battle wasn't won, it had only begun. Marcus stepped back slightly, staring at the board. The first step was complete, undeniably correct. The silence that followed was louder than the laughter had been. Every student leaned forward, every phone recording closer, every doubt hanging heavier. And in that moment, the entire room waited breathlessly to see whether Marcus Reed's next move would shatter him, or prove them all wrong. The chalk mark stood there, bright against the green board. One small step, yet enough to smother the room into silence. The laughter had died, the jokes cut off mid-breath. All that remained was the stillness of disbelief, thick and uneasy. Marcus's shoulders rose and fell with a steady rhythm as he inhaled. His hand still trembled faintly, but his mind was locked in. The numbers no longer blurred under pressure. They sharpened. He could see the solution unraveling ahead of him, a path he had walked many times in the solitude of his bedroom. Only this time, that path stretched out under the judgmental gaze of 30 classmates and the calculating smirk of Mr. Carter. Carter's voice broke the quiet, sharp and dismissive. Don't get too comfortable, Reed. One step doesn't make a solution. The words struck like darts, designed to puncture the fragile confidence building inside Marcus. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he tightened his grip on the chalk, drawing the next line with precision. The equation began to shift, piece by piece, and for those who understood math even a little, the logic of his work was undeniable. A murmur rolled across the class. Wait, that looks right. A girl in the front whispered to her neighbor. The phones that had been raised for ridicule now captured something entirely different, a story no one had expected to witness. The quiet genius they ignored daily was dismantling the trap laid for him. Marcus's movements grew steadier. Each step written was deliberate, calculated, his handwriting neat despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He wasn't just solving, he was teaching the board to obey him, bending the numbers into clarity. Inside, his mind worked furiously. He remembered the long summer nights, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his room as he replayed online tutorials until the logic stuck. He remembered writing problems over and over in worn notebooks, his handwriting cramped but relentless. He remembered the sting of invisibility, being overlooked for honors classes, ignored in group work, dismissed by teachers who saw his silence as ignorant. That pain was now fuel. Step by step, he carved out a rhythm on the board. The room had grown so quiet that the faint squeak of chalk against the surface sounded deafening. Each stroke was a declaration. I know this. I belong here. I am not who you think I am. But as Marcus advanced, Carter shifted uncomfortably at his desk. His smirk faltered into a tight line, his eyes narrowing as though recalculating a plan that had gone wrong. He leaned forward, tapping a pencil against his desk, the noise sharp, a poor attempt to break Marcus's focus. You're just copying what you've seen before, Carter said suddenly, his voice louder this time. This isn't real understanding. Don't think a trick will fool me. A few students glanced at Carter in confusion. The words felt defensive, brittle. Marcus's chalk didn't pause. His lips pressed together, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The numbers spoke for him. Another step, and the structure of the problem became clear. Those in the classroom who had mocked him minutes ago now leaned forward, their laughter caught in their throats, their phones steadier, as though they didn't want to miss this reversal. The ridicule that had fueled Carter's challenge was transforming into awe, an awe so sharp it bordered on discomfort. Marcus's mind drifted again, not backward this time, but deeper into himself. He remembered Ethan's words after a test months ago. Man, you're doing problems I can't even touch. You should be in the advanced group. Marcus had smiled faintly then, brushing it off. But now he felt it. He wasn't just good, he was great. And for the first time, the people who doubted him were being forced to see it. He added the next step, his chalk gliding with a steadiness that surprised even him. He no longer felt the trembling in his hand. The doubt hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted into something else, into fire, into determination. The problem was halfway complete. He stopped briefly, scanning his work. It was perfect so far. Then, from the back of the room, a sharp voice cut through. No way he's doing this on his own. Someone must have shown him already. The voice belonged to Derek, one of the louder students, his tone dripping with resentment. The comment was less about math, and more about race. How could Marcus, quiet, black, overlooked Marcus, possibly be solving what others could? The words hung in the air, toxic, heavy. Some students nodded subtly, the bias inside them resisting what their eyes saw. They couldn't accept Marcus's brilliance without trying to diminish it. Marcus felt the sting, but didn't turn around. Instead, he clenched the chalk tighter. His mind screamed with all the times people had thought the same thing, but never said it aloud. You're not capable. You're not smart enough. If you succeed, it must be luck. He pressed forward, adding the next set of calculations. The clarity of the solution grew undeniable. Even Derek fell silent, his accusation swallowed by the proof forming in white chalk. Unexpectedly, a whisper broke from the front row, soft, almost reverent. He's actually doing it. It was Emily, a top student often praised for her math skills. She sounded more surprised than impressed, as if she hadn't imagined Marcus capable of standing beside her academically. But the acknowledgement, faint as it was, cracked another piece of the room's disbelief. Carter's jaw tightened. He stood, pacing a few steps closer to the board. His presence loomed, his shadow stretching across Marcus's work. Careful now, he said sharply, voice edged with impatience. One mistake and it all falls apart. The threat was subtle, but Marcus felt it. His breathing quickened, but he forced himself to stay steady. He wasn't just solving for himself now. He was solving for every moment of doubt, every whispered dismissal, every smirk. Another line, another number, another piece falling into place. The problem was nearly solved. The rhythm of chalk against board had become hypnotic, each stroke pulling the class deeper into silence. Marcus's back straightened, his movements confident, almost defiant. He wasn't hiding anymore. And then just as he reached the final step, his chalk snapped in half. The sound cracked through the silence like thunder. Half the chalk clattered to the floor, rolling under the board. Marcus froze, his hand suspended in midair, the final line unfinished. The silence exploded into whispers. See? He's done. He lost it. Knew it wouldn't last. Marcus's chest tightened again. The broken chalk felt like a metaphor, like every force around him was determined to fracture his progress. He bent slowly, retrieving the remaining piece. His fingers shook as he stood again. He pressed the broken chalk to the board. The final step hovered, waiting. The class leaned in, the air thick with anticipation. Carter's smirk had returned, faint but present, as though he believed the break had rattled Marcus enough to end it. But Marcus steadied himself. He thought of his mother, her words echoing, "Don't let them tell you what you can't do." He thought of Ethan, the one person who always believed. He thought of himself, not as invisible, not as underestimated, but as capable, brilliant, deserving. And with a deep breath, Marcus began to finish the problem. The chalk traced the final strokes, the solution seconds away from completion. The room leaned forward as one, breaths caught in their throats. Carter's eyes narrowed, his smirk twisting into something sharper. Marcus's next move would determine everything, the difference between humiliation and undeniable victory. The chalk squeaked against the board again, marking a steady rhythm as Marcus advanced through the problem. Each line was sharper than the last, more confident, more deliberate. The tension in the room shifted from mockery to astonishment. Students who had been recording out of ridicule now leaned forward, eyes wide, phones trembling slightly in their hands. Mr. Carter, once lounging with smug composure, straightened in his chair. His smirk was gone. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, peering harder at the numbers forming under Marcus's hand. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had called Marcus to the board expecting a quick stumble, a blank stare, a moment that would cement his low expectations. Instead, the boy was dismantling the very trap he had laid. "Interesting," Carter said aloud, his tone calculated, his voice loud enough to fill the silence. "Looks like you've memorized a few steps from somewhere. Impressive recall, Marcus. But recall isn't the same as understanding." The words slithered through the classroom, designed to plant suspicion. A few students glanced at each other, hesitant. Was it possible Marcus had just rehearsed this one problem? Was this luck? Marcus's back stiffened, but he didn't turn. His chalk didn't pause. He wrote the next step with even greater precision, as if answering without words. His silence wasn't weakness. It was defiance. Still, Carter wasn't done. He rose from his desk and paced slowly toward the front, each footstep deliberate, meant to assert control. His voice dropped to a low, almost mocking register. "Tell me, Marcus," he said, circling closer. "Do you really know why you're doing that step? Or are you just copying what you've seen online? Be honest." Marcus didn't respond. His lips pressed tightly together, His eyes locked on the board. His breathing was steady now, his movements sure. He wasn't here to explain himself. He was here to prove himself. The students shifted uneasily. The room felt like a battlefield where chalk was the only weapon. And Marcus was refusing to surrender it. Carter tried again, louder this time. Class, let's remember, math isn't about tricks. It's about real understanding. Don't be fooled if someone appears to know. Appearances can be misleading. The implication hung heavy. It wasn't just about Marcus's work. It was about Marcus himself, his skin, his background, his very presence in that room. The message was clear. A boy like him couldn't truly understand. A murmur rippled through the students. For the first time, though, it wasn't laughter. It was discomfort. They could see what was happening, even if they couldn't name it. The teacher wasn't teaching. He was scrambling. Marcus pressed forward. Another step completed, flawlessly. The logic was tight, undeniable. Even students who barely grasped calculus could sense it. He wasn't fumbling. He was leading them through the problem with a confidence none of them had expected. Carter's panic sharpened. He stepped closer, hovering near Marcus now, his shadow spilling over the boy's arm. He spoke quickly, almost desperately. Careful there. You've gone too far. You'll make a mistake if you're not careful. But Marcus didn't falter. He moved to the next part, chalk scratching steadily. His handwriting was clear, the kind teachers usually praised. The equation bent under his hand, reshaping itself toward its solution. A girl in the front row, Emily, whispered to herself, "He's actually doing it." The words slipped out louder than she meant. Heads turned, nods forming around the room. A shift was happening. The tide of doubt that Carter had stoked was turning into something else, something he couldn't control. Carter's voice rose sharply. "Don't be fooled by coincidences." He forced a laugh, hollow and strained. "Even a broken clock is right twice a day." The remark fell flat. No one laughed with him. Marcus added another step, then another. His confidence grew with each line. The board was filling with order, with evidence. The problem was nearly complete, and Carter felt the ground beneath him slipping. He glanced around the room, searching for an ally. Derek, usually quick to echo his authority, avoided eye contact. Even Miss Harris, the substitute, had stopped grading papers and was watching intently, her brow furrowed not in skepticism, but in quiet recognition. Carter's throat tightened. For the first time, he felt the edges of fear. What would it mean if Marcus finished? What would it mean if the boy he'd dismissed, mocked, underestimated, publicly stood there and succeeded? It would mean Carter was wrong, and in front of witnesses. He couldn't let it happen. "Stop for a second," Carter snapped suddenly, stepping closer to Marcus. "Explain to us why you did that step." Marcus froze, chalk hovering an inch from the board. His heart quickened again. He hadn't expected the interruption, but he knew what it was. A tactic, a last attempt to break his rhythm. Slowly, he lowered the chalk and spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Because it simplifies the expression." The answer was concise, correct, undeniable. The class murmured again, louder this time. Some students smiled faintly, shaking their heads in disbelief. Carter's face flushed. He forced another laugh, brittle. "Well, lucky guess." The words sounded weak even to his own ears. Marcus turned back to the board, his silence cutting sharper than any retort. He continued. The final steps unfolded cleanly, his chalk gliding with ease. The room was locked in, breathless. Phones captured every second, every stroke. Carter hovered behind him, watching the inevitability he could no longer stop. His hand twitched at his side, his jaw clenched. He wanted to snatch the chalk, to erase the board, to take control back. But he couldn't. He had started this, and now he was being forced to watch it end. The last step arrived. Marcus paused for a heartbeat. The chalk held steady, then wrote the final answer in clear, bold strokes. The room gasped. It was perfect. The equation that had been meant to humiliate him now stood solved in flawless detail. The boy they had laughed at, doubted, dismissed, had done what no one thought he could. The silence was deafening. And then from the back of the room, a voice broke it. He got it right. The words weren't mocking. They were astonished. Carter's face tightened, his eyes darting toward the board as if searching for a mistake. But there was none. He knew it. Everyone knew it. The panic in his chest bloomed fully now. Hot and suffocating. His authority had cracked. His smirk had shattered. and his class was no longer laughing with him. They were staring at Marcus Reed like they were seeing him for the first time. Marcus set the chalk down gently, his hand no longer trembling. He turned slowly, meeting the eyes of his classmates. The room remained frozen, waiting for Carter's reaction. And in that suspended silence, the teacher realized the worst. He wasn't the one in control anymore. The silence in the classroom lingered like smoke after a fire. Marcus had set the chalk down, his fingers coated in white dust, his chest rising and falling with quiet steadiness. The problem was complete, flawlessly complete, and 30 students sat stunned in their seats, staring not at the board but at him. No one clapped. No one spoke. Even laughter, the one sound Marcus had grown accustomed to in moments like these, refused to return. What filled the room now was something heavier, disbelief. And in the middle of it all, phones remained raised. The tiny red dots of recording lights blinked like unblinking eyes, capturing the entire shift from humiliation to brilliance, from mockery to awe. It was Kayla, a junior sitting in the back row, who posted the first clip. Her caption was short, sharp, and explosive. Black kid solves calculus after racist joke. She didn't think twice. She didn't even finish editing the video. She hit post and slipped her phone back into her pocket, just as Carter, red-faced and rattled, barked, "Everyone, phones away." But it was too late. The internet had already begun its work. By the end of lunch period, the clip had crossed the walls of Jefferson High. Students in the cafeteria whispered about it, replayed it, shoved screens into each other's faces. Marcus's name, once invisible in the background of their school, was suddenly on everyone's lips. "Yo, that's Marcus, right? From Carter's class?" He killed that problem. Carter was shook. Some voices carried admiration, others disbelief. But the video kept spreading, moving beyond the school's walls, into timelines and feeds where strangers clicked, watched, and reacted. By evening, the clip had exploded. It hit TikTok's For You page, carried on waves of comments and duets. On Twitter, someone reposted it with the caption, "Racist teacher tries to clown a black kid, and he ends up solving the whole thing. Genius." The comments poured in by the thousands. "This is the most satisfying thing I've seen all week. He didn't even flinch. That's brilliance under pressure. That teacher deserves to be fired. Protect this kid at all costs." And beneath those, another thread of uglier voices. "Bet he memorized it. Probably staged. No way he actually knew that. Just because he solved one problem doesn't make him smart." The divide was sharp, but the attention was undeniable. At home that night, Marcus sat on his bed with his phone buzzing non-stop. Ethan had texted him link after link, screenshots of posts with thousands of likes, his excitement spilling out in capital letters. "Ethan. Bro. You're everywhere. Ethan. You've got like 200K views already. Ethan. This is insane." Marcus scrolled, eyes wide. His own face filled the screen again and again. The quiet determination, the chalk scratching across the board, the stunned silence of his classmates when he finished. He watched it all like it wasn't him at all, like it was a stranger living a life he didn't recognize. Angela, his mother, peeked into the room after her late shift. She saw the glow of the phone, the way his eyes were fixed, unblinking. "What's that?" she asked gently. Stepping inside, Marcus hesitated, then handed her the phone. She pressed play, her tired eyes narrowing at first as she processed the scene. She heard the laughter, the teacher's mocking tone, and then her son, steady and brilliant, dismantling it all. By the time the video ended, Angela's hands were trembling. "They laughed at you," she whispered. Her voice cracked, not with shame but with fury. "They laughed at you like you didn't belong." Marcus lowered his gaze, unsure how to answer. But then Angela replayed the end. The silence, the gasp, the undeniable solution filling the board. She pressed her palm against her mouth, her shoulders shaking. "You showed them," she murmured, tears spilling over. "Marcus, you showed them." The clip continued to travel through the night. On Instagram, it was reshared by influencers with millions of followers. On Twitter, hashtags began to trend. "Marcus solved it," and "not a joke." Even on Facebook, older generations passed it along, writing long posts about perseverance and brilliance in the face of prejudice. By morning, the local news station picked it up. Their segment was short but striking. Jefferson High student shocks classmates after being asked to solve a calculus problem, as a joke. The clip has gone viral, raising questions about racial bias in classroom. The video played on loop behind the anchor's desk. Marcus's face, nervous but steady, chalk in hand, became an image broadcast across the city. At school the next day, the atmosphere had shifted. Students who had laughed at him now stared in awe, whispering in the hallways as he passed. Some approached with clumsy admiration. "Yo, Marcus, that was crazy. You're like a genius or something." Others avoided him altogether, their silence louder than words, ashamed of how they'd joined the laughter. Ethan grinned as he walked beside Marcus. "Man, you're famous. You realize that, right? You just blew up." Marcus shook his head, overwhelmed. "I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," Ethan said, "but now the whole world knows what I already knew. You were brilliant." But not everyone was celebrating. Mr. Carter sat in his office between classes, scrolling through his phone with growing horror. The clip had spread far beyond what he imagined. His name wasn't in the caption, but those who recognized him had already begun tagging. "That's Carter, right? The teacher." Comments ripped into him. "Racist teacher tried to humiliate him. Backfired. How is this guy even allowed to teach? Marcus deserves better than this." His jaw tightened as he tossed the phone onto his desk. His career, his authority, his reputation. It was slipping away because of a moment he thought would be harmless. A joke. But what unsettled him most wasn't the internet. It was the way his own students looked at him now. Not with respect, not with laughter, but with suspicion, with judgment. In class, the tension was suffocating. Marcus's classmates whispered to one another, phones buzzing with notifications, as the video climbed higher online. Carter tried to continue teaching, but his words were drowned out by the knowledge that the world outside their walls was watching. And Marcus, quiet Marcus, sat with his notebook open, pretending to take notes while the truth settled inside him. His life had changed overnight. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't the background. He was the headline. At the end of the day, Marcus opened his locker and found a folded note shoved inside. The handwriting was sharp, unfamiliar. It read, "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts. They'll turn on you soon." The note burned in Marcus's hand as he stood by his locker, the hallway buzzing with chatter about him, but blind to the warning folded between his fingers. "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts. They'll turn on you soon." He slipped it quickly into his backpack, not wanting Ethan, or anyone else, to see it. But the words lingered, feeding a quiet unease. He had gone from invisible to famous overnight, and the school was no longer the same place. By the following week, Jefferson High was a battlefield of whispered allegiances. In the teacher's lounge, the staff meeting was tense. Principal Harris had called everyone together after the viral clip refused to die down. The local news station had aired a follow-up, and parents were now emailing the school board demanding an investigation. Carter sat stiffly at the end of the long table, arms crossed, jaw clenched. His colleagues surrounded him, some speaking cautiously in his defense, others not bothering to hide their criticism. "Look, I've known Carter for years," said Mr. Daniels from the history department. "He's strict, yes, but racist. I don't buy it. That video was out of context. We all know how these things look online." Across the table, Miss Alvarez, the English teacher, leaned forward sharply. "Out of context?" He singled Marcus out. The entire class laughed. "And now you want to pretend it's just a misunderstanding?" The room bristled. Some shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to pick a side. Others nodded silently, their loyalties exposed in their silence. Principal Harris cleared his throat, trying to steady the room. "Let's not rush to judgment. Our focus should be the school's reputation. We need to handle this delicately." "Delicately?" Ms. Alvarez snapped. "A student was humiliated in front of his peers because of who he is. The fact that it took going viral for anyone to notice says more about us than about him." Carter slammed his palm against the table. "Enough. I didn't do anything wrong. It was a harmless joke. Students make them all the time. Why am I the villain here?" No one answered. The silence was damning. Outside the lounge, the divide spread to the student body. Marcus had become both a symbol and a target. Some students treated him like a hero. Strangers who had never spoken to him before now nodded in hallways, gave him fist bumps, whispered "Respect, man," as he passed. Emily, the girl who had once dismissed him, stopped him in the cafeteria to say, "I saw the way you handled yourself. That was brave." But others recoiled. Derek and his circle muttered insults under their breath, loud enough for Marcus to catch, but quiet enough to avoid trouble. "Show off. Think you're better than us now?" The resentment wasn't about the math. It was about the shift in power. Ethan walked with Marcus between classes, hyper-aware of the stares. "They're split, man," he said. "Half the school thinks you're a genius. The other half's looking for a reason to tear you down." Marcus kept his head low, books hugged to his chest. "Feels like they're both watching me. Like I can't breathe without it being recorded." He wasn't wrong. Phones lingered in his presence now, ready to capture every expression, every stumble. He was no longer anonymous. He was spectacle. The tension wasn't limited to students. Parents joined the battle. At pickup, clusters argued in the parking lot. Some demanded Carter's resignation. Others defended him as a good teacher under attack by cancel culture. Lines were drawn not by facts, but by fears and prejudices that had simmered quietly for years. Angela Reed felt the weight most of all. She worked her shifts exhausted, only to come home and find emails from reporters in her inbox. Notes slipped under their apartment door. Strangers offering scholarships or speaking engagements. The support was overwhelming, but so was the scrutiny. One night she sat at the kitchen table with Marcus, holding his hands tightly across the scratched wood surface. "This isn't just about math anymore," she said, her eyes wet. "You've become something bigger than yourself, and that scares people." Marcus lowered his gaze. "I didn't ask for it." "I know," Angela whispered, "but you can't run from it now. You've shown them what they tried to hide, that brilliance doesn't have a face they can predict." At school, the divide deepened further. Classrooms became echo chambers of debate. Some students replayed the video proudly. Others sneered that Marcus was milking it for attention. Even teachers weren't immune. Ms. Alvarez spoke openly about systemic racism, while Mr. Daniels complained privately about witch hunts. And in the middle of it all, Marcus moved like a ghost caught in a storm. Admired, resented, watched, judged. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning. Carter entered class, his posture stiff, his voice sharper than ever. He tried to regain control, assigning extra problems, demanding silence, insisting he wouldn't tolerate distractions. But his authority was cracked. Students whispered openly, phones buzzing with updates from social media threads about him. When Marcus answered a question correctly without being called on, Carter snapped, "Do not speak unless you're asked." The words rang harsh, laced with frustration. The class froze, recognizing the disproportionate bite. Ethan muttered under his breath, "He's losing it." After class, Marcus found another note in his locker. This one wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. "You think you embarrassed him? Wait until he embarrasses you." The letters were jagged, hurried. His stomach twisted as he read it. Someone wasn't just angry, they wanted revenge. By lunchtime, rumors swirled. Some claimed Carter was facing suspension. Others said the school board was stepping in. But the most unsettling whisper was that Marcus himself was being called into meetings. He tried to ignore it until late in the afternoon. The loudspeaker crackled overhead. "Marcus Reed, please report to the principal's office." The hallway went silent. Students glanced at him, some with sympathy, others with smirks. Ethan's eyes widened. "They're actually pulling you in." Marcus's pulse raced. He shoved his books into his bag and stood, the weight of the moment pressing heavy on his shoulders. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about what the school was going to do next. He walked slowly toward the principal's office, each step echoing louder than the last. When he reached the door, the secretary looked up nervously. "He's waiting for you. Alone." Marcus swallowed hard, gripped the strap of his backpack tighter, and pushed the door open. The office door clicked shut behind Marcus, the sound sharp in the silence. The space smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee. Diplomas lined the wall behind the desk, framed certificates and photos of sports teams, meant to project authority and pride. Principal Harris sat at the desk, hands folded, his face drawn into the careful neutrality of a man who had been preparing for this conversation. He was in his late 40s, a clean-shaven man who had mastered the art of smiling without warmth. His suit was neat, his tie perfectly knotted, but his eyes darted nervously as Marcus stepped in. "Marcus," Harris said, gesturing to the chair opposite. "Have a seat." Marcus lowered himself slowly, his backpack still strapped to his shoulders. The leather chair swallowed him, making him feel younger than his 16 years. His palms were damp, but his expression was steady. Harris leaned forward, folding his hands together. His tone was soft, deliberate. "I want you to know we've been paying attention to what happened in Mr. Carter's class. And of course we're aware of the video. Marcus's stomach tightened. The video. The thing that had changed everything. Harris sighed heavily. The kind of sigh meant to suggest weariness rather than guilt. Now this attention, he said carefully, has created a difficult situation for the school. We've received calls, emails, even reporters showing up. And while I understand your perspective, we need to think about the bigger picture. Marcus frowned slightly. The bigger picture? Yes. Harris nodded, as if the phrase explained everything. The reputation of Jefferson High. We are a respected institution. One viral video can make people think otherwise. It's not fair, of course, but perception matters. Marcus felt his chest tighten again. So, what are you saying? Harris's gaze hardened just slightly, though his voice stayed calm. I'm saying this needs to stay within the school. No more talking to reporters. No more fueling the online fire. If you downplay this, let things quiet down. We can handle it internally. Marcus sat in silence, his heart pounding. He had expected this. His mother had warned him, institutions protect themselves first. Harris continued, his words heavy with polished caution. I know you felt singled out. I'm not dismissing your feelings. But sometimes things get exaggerated. The last thing you need is to be caught up in something political. You're a smart young man. Don't let this define you. Define you. The phrase echoed, as though silence would protect him, as though swallowing his truth was safer than letting it out. Marcus's jaw tightened. But it did happen, he said quietly. Everyone saw it. Harris leaned back, steepling his fingers. Everyone saw a video, a clip. You and I both know how these things work. Context gets lost. Emotions run high. If you keep quiet, this will pass. If you push it further, it could hurt you. College applications, scholarships. Schools don't like controversy. The warning was clear, veiled in fatherly concern. But Marcus heard what was underneath. Protect the school. Protect the system. Don't protect yourself. He thought of his mother's hands, raw from scrubbing offices at night. He thought of Ethan, shaking his head and saying, it's not right. He thought of Carter's smirk, the laughter of the class, the silence that had only shifted when he proved them all wrong. And now here he was, being asked to erase it. Marcus swallowed hard. You're asking me not to tell the truth. Harris's smile was tight, forced. I'm asking you to be wise. Sometimes silence is stronger than speaking out. For a long moment, the office was quiet. The hum of the air conditioner filled the room. Marcus stared at the floor, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to shrink back, to avoid more attention, to let it all fade. He had never wanted to be a headline. He had wanted to be invisible. But invisibility was the cage they had kept him in. Silence was what let people like Carter smirk and get away with it. Silence was what let teachers skip over his raised hand. What let classmates dismiss his brilliance. What let the world pretend not to see. His throat burned. His hands clenched. And then, finally, he lifted his eyes to Harris. I'm not staying quiet, Marcus said, his voice low but steady. Not this time. Harris blinked, the faintest flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Marcus, think carefully. I have, Marcus cut in, surprising even himself with the firmness in his tone. If I stay quiet, it's like it never happened. And it did happen. You can protect the school's name, but that doesn't protect me, or anyone else this happens to. The room thickened with tension. Harris's jaw tightened, but his polished demeanor didn't crack. He leaned forward again, lowering his voice. You don't understand the consequences. Once you go public, you can't take it back. People will look at you differently. They'll expect things of you. They'll criticize you. They'll twist your words. Marcus's heart pounded, but he didn't flinch. They're already doing that. Harris studied him for a long moment, the mask of neutrality slipping just slightly into frustration. Finally, he sighed again, heavier this time. Then I can't protect you. Marcus's chest tightened. The words weren't a threat. They were a withdrawal. A line being drawn. He was on his own. He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. Then I'll protect myself. For a moment, Harris said nothing. His eyes followed Marcus as he adjusted his backpack and turned toward the door. The principal's face was unreadable, but his silence was louder than any warning. Marcus's hand touched the doorknob. His pulse raced, but his steps were steady. He had chosen. As he opened the door, the secretary looked up sharply. Marcus, your mother's here. She's waiting inside. Marcus froze. Angela had arrived earlier than expected, and now she was about to walk into the same room where he had just refused silence. The air between the three of them would decide what happened next. Marcus froze in the doorway, his hand still on the knob. The secretary's words hung heavy in the air. "Your mother's here, she's waiting inside." Angela Reed stepped forward from the waiting area, her purse slung over one arm, her eyes scanning the room with sharp clarity. She had come straight from work, her grocery store uniform still on, her name tag crooked from the rush. But there was no mistaking the fire in her presence. "Marcus," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Then her eyes lifted to Principal Harris. Her expression was polite but firm, the kind of controlled calm that hid a storm underneath. "Mrs. Reed," Harris began, his voice laced with the same practiced neutrality he had used on Marcus. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please sit." Angela didn't sit. She straightened her posture, chin raised. "I'm fine standing." Her gaze darted briefly to her son, reading the unease in his face. "Marcus, you all right?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." But his voice lacked conviction, and Angela caught it instantly. Her eyes narrowed at Harris. "What exactly did you call him in here for?" Harris steepled his fingers on the desk. "We were simply discussing how best to move forward. This situation has gained a great deal of attention online. We need to ensure it doesn't spiral further." Angela's lips tightened. "Spiral further?" "My son was humiliated in front of his classmates. That teacher set him up to fail, and when he didn't, the world saw the truth. The only thing spiraling here is the school's attempt to bury it." The room went tense. Harris shifted uncomfortably, his polished demeanor cracking just slightly. "Mrs. Reed, I understand your frustration." "No," Angela cut in sharply. "You don't. You don't understand because you've never lived it." Her voice trembled for the first time, but not from weakness, from memory. "I was his age once," she said, her eyes fixed on Harris. "I sat in classrooms where teachers looked at me the same way Carter looked at Marcus, like I didn't belong, like I wasn't capable. I raised my hand with the right answers, and still got ignored. And now, decades later, I'm watching my son go through the same thing." Her words filled the room with raw weight. Marcus sat frozen in the chair, watching his mother relive wounds she rarely spoke about. Angela's tone hardened. "And it doesn't stop at school. At my job, I've been passed over for promotions by men half as experienced as me. I've been told I wasn't a fit for leadership. I've worked double shifts just to keep food on our table while hearing whispers behind my back that people like me should be grateful for what we have. Do you know what that feels like? To work twice as hard and still be seen as less." Harris lowered his gaze briefly, but he didn't answer. Angela pressed on. "And now you want Marcus to stay quiet? To swallow this? To protect your reputation? No, not again. I won't let him carry the silence I carried." Marcus felt something stir in his chest, a mix of pride and sorrow. His mother's voice, usually gentle, was a weapon now. She wasn't just defending him. She was fighting against years of her own pain. Harris finally spoke, his tone firmer. "Mrs. Reed, with respect, our priority must be the school's image. These viral moments come and go, but the damage to an institution can last for years. If Marcus continues fueling this, it could create problems for him as well. College applications, scholarships. Schools look at these things. You don't want him to be defined by controversy." Angela let out a sharp laugh, bitter and humorless. "Controversy? You mean racism? Call it what it is. My son didn't create the controversy. Your teacher did. And now you want him to carry the burden of silence so you don't look bad? No, sir, that's not happening." The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus's pulse quickened as he watched Harris's composure falter under his mother's fire. Angela stepped closer to the desk, her voice quieter now, but more dangerous. "You have one responsibility, Principal Harris, to protect the students in this school. All of them. That includes Marcus. And right now, your concern isn't him. It's the headlines. Well, I've had enough of protecting institutions at the expense of my family." Marcus's chest swelled with emotion. He had never seen his mother so unyielding, so unwilling to bend. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about history, about everything she had carried and refused to pass down. Harris cleared his throat, his voice brittle. "Mrs. Reed, I must advise caution. If you choose to take this further, the situation could escalate in ways you can't control." Angela's eyes locked on his. unwavering. Then let it escalate. The room fell silent. Marcus's throat tightened. He had walked in ready to stay quiet, afraid of what speaking out would mean. But his mother was fearless. She had lived this story before, and she refused to let him live it again. Angela turned to Marcus, her expression softening only for him. Baby, you don't let them take your voice. Not for their comfort. Not for their image. Do you hear me? Marcus nodded, his eyes burning. I hear you. Harris leaned back, defeated but unwilling to admit it. His eyes flicked between mother and son, the power in the room slipping out of his hands. Then I suppose you've made your decision. Angela straightened her shoulders, her tone final. Yes. And my next call will be to someone who actually wants the truth heard. Marcus blinked, startled. Mom. She pulled her phone from her purse, her fingers trembling slightly. Not with fear, but with resolve. I know a journalist. Someone who's been covering stories like this for years. She's been waiting for someone brave enough to speak. Harris's expression darkened, but he said nothing. He knew there was no pulling them back now. Angela turned to her son, squeezing his shoulder gently. It's time people heard your story, Marcus. Not just the clip. The whole truth. Marcus's breath caught. The thought of going public, of exposing himself further, terrified him. But standing beside his mother, seeing the fire in her eyes, he felt something stronger than fear. The courage to keep going. Angela stepped into the hallway, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low but determined. This is Angela Reed. I have a story you will want to hear. Marcus stood frozen, the weight of what was about to come crashing into him. The story wasn't just his anymore. It was theirs, and the world was about to hear it. Angela Reed's voice had barely faded from the phone call before the story began to ripple outward. The journalist she contacted, Lena Torres, worked for a local independent paper, but had a reputation for covering stories others ignored, especially stories of injustice. Within 24 hours, Lena was sitting in the Reed apartment, her recorder on the table between mugs of coffee. Angela spoke first, her voice steady, recounting what she saw in her son's eyes when he came home that day. Shame, anger, the weight of being mocked for who he was. Marcus sat beside her, quiet at first, until Lena turned gently toward him. What did it feel like? She asked. Marcus hesitated. Words had always been harder than numbers, but he forced himself to speak. It felt like I was a joke, like I wasn't supposed to get it right. They weren't waiting for the answer. They were waiting for me to fail. The recorder captured everything. The tremor in his voice, the silence that followed, the rawness of a boy finally being heard. Lena's article was published 2 days later, with the headline, From Joke to Genius, Black Student Outsmarts Racist Setup at Jefferson High. The piece blended Marcus's words with Angela's history, weaving a story of generational resilience. Within hours, it was shared far beyond the paper's usual audience. Major outlets picked it up, repackaging the headline into their own segments. By the end of the week, Marcus's face was on television screens. National anchors replayed the viral clip while discussing systemic racism in education. Hashtags like Marcus solved it and Shannon joke trended for days. Influencers posted reaction videos, praising his calm brilliance. Activists cited his story as evidence of what Black students endured daily. But as the praise grew louder, so did the backlash. Comment sections split into two camps. Some wrote messages of admiration. This young man is the definition of excellence. He turned humiliation into victory. Inspiring. Protect Marcus Reed. He's going places. Others turned cruel. He's playing the race card. Every kid gets teased. Why make it about racism? Bet his mom coached him for the interview. The duality was sharp. Marcus had become a symbol, but symbols weren't always seen as human. At school, the storm intensified. Teachers whispered in hallways. Some students congratulated him with awkward smiles. Others muttered about him chasing attention. One even sneered. Guess you're too famous to sit with us now. Marcus felt torn between pride and exhaustion. He had never asked for this stage. He hadn't wanted to be a symbol. He just wanted to be treated fairly, to be seen for who he was. Ethan noticed the shift immediately. Walking beside Marcus one afternoon, he muttered, "They're acting like you asked for the spotlight." Marcus shook his head, weary. "I didn't. I just answered a question." "Yeah," Ethan said bitterly. "And that's the problem. You weren't supposed to." The school board announced it would review the matter, but the statement was vague. Carter remained in his classroom, his posture stiff, his eyes burning every time Marcus passed. If before Carter had smirked with superiority, now he bristled with quiet rage. At home, Angela monitored the news with wary eyes. Some calls offered scholarships, mentorships, opportunities, others carried veiled threats. One voicemail sneered, "Keep your boy in check before he ruins his life." She deleted it before Marcus could hear. Marcus tried to focus on his schoolwork, but his phone buzzed constantly, requests for interviews. Strangers praising him, strangers tearing him apart. Every notification chipped away at his peace. Late one night, as he sat on his bed scrolling, he muttered aloud, "They don't even know me." Angela, passing by, overheard. She stepped inside, her voice soft but firm. "That's because they're not looking at you, Marcus. They're looking at what you represent. And that's heavier than any math problem." Marcus set the phone down, his eyes burning. "I don't want to represent anything. I just wanted to prove I wasn't a joke." Angela sat beside him, wrapping her arm around his shoulders. "You did prove it. To them. To yourself. But the truth is, sometimes proving yourself means you can't go back to being invisible." The storm reached its peak when a national morning show invited Marcus and Angela for an interview. Sitting under the studio lights, Marcus answered carefully, his hands folded in his lap. "I didn't want to embarrass anyone," he said, voice steady. "I just wanted to show that I belonged in that classroom. That I could do it." The host leaned in, eyes sympathetic. "And what would you say to other students who feel the way you did, overlooked, underestimated?" Marcus paused, his throat tight. "I'd say, don't let them decide who you are, even if it feels like the whole room is against you." The clip went viral again, millions sharing his words as inspiration. But the backlash sharpened too. Conservative commentators mocked the coverage, calling it overblown. One headline read, "Teen exploits viral fame with racism claims." The words cut Marcus deeply, reducing his lived pain to a gimmick. At Jefferson High, the divide hardened. Students who once wavered now chose sides openly. Some wore shirts with Marcus's hashtags in support. Others whispered threats in locker rooms, warning him that fame didn't last. Through it all, Carter stayed silent in class, his presence colder than ever. He no longer mocked Marcus openly, but the tension between them was a live wire. Marcus felt it in every glance, every unspoken word. Then, on a Monday morning, the silence shattered. Carter stood at the front of the classroom, a printed sheet of paper in hand. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying the tone of a man backed into a corner. "I have a statement to make," he announced. The class fell silent. Phones slipped discreetly from pockets, ready to record. Marcus's chest tightened, his pulse quickening. Carter unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning it once before he began. "I want to address the rumors and accusations circulating about me. What happened in class was not racism. It was a teaching moment, taken out of context. I never intended to embarrass anyone. The narrative being spread is false and damaging. I have dedicated my career to teaching students of all backgrounds, and I will not allow my reputation to be destroyed by a misinterpretation." His voice grew sharper with each word, his jaw tight, his posture rigid. "I categorically deny that race played any role in my actions, and I refuse to be painted as a villain." The paper shook slightly in his hands as he lowered it. His eyes flicked toward Marcus, hard and unyielding. The room buzzed with whispers, phones recording every second. Marcus sat frozen, the weight of Carter's denial crashing over him. The world had already chosen sides, but now his teacher was publicly declaring war on the truth. The buzz in Carter's classroom still hadn't faded after his public denial. Students whispered furiously, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding as if they had been given permission to dismiss Marcus's experience altogether. Phones had captured every word, and by the end of the day, Carter's statement was everywhere. On social media, the divide sharpened into something uglier. Marcus scrolled late into the night, the blue glow of his phone casting shadows on his tired face. The comments poured in. "He's lying for attention. That kid just wants to ruin a teacher's career. Another race-baiting story. Pathetic." For every supportive post, "Stay strong, Marcus, or we see you keep shining," there were 10 more dripping with venom. Some were vague insults. Others were specific, threatening. "Better watch your back at school. Kids like you need to be put in your place." His chest tightened as he read. The words dug under his skin, sharper than chalk dust, heavier than Carter's smirk had ever been. Angela noticed the dark circles under his eyes. One morning, as she packed her apron for her second job, she stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at him. "Baby, you've got to stop reading those comments. They'll eat you alive." Marcus kept his gaze on the cereal bowl in front of him. "What if they're right?" he whispered. Angela crossed the room, placing her hand firmly on his shoulder. "No. They're scared of you. Scared because you showed them something they didn't want to see. Don't let their fear become yours." But at school, the storm was harder to ignore. In the hallways, whispers followed him everywhere. Some students stepped aside, giving him nods of respect. Others muttered insults as he passed. Derek, never subtle, leaned against a locker one day and sneered. "So what's it feel like, Reed? Being famous for whining?" Ethan bristled beside him. "Back off, Derek." Derek smirked. "Relax. I'm just asking a question. Don't want him crying to another reporter, do we?" The laughter from Derek's circle echoed down the hallway, and Marcus felt his face burn. He kept walking, his steps faster, Ethan trailing beside him with clenched fists. Inside the classrooms, the tension was worse. Teachers treated him differently, some avoiding eye contact, others overcompensating with forced kindness. Assignments piled up, but Marcus couldn't focus. Every problem on the page blurred with the memory of Carter's denial, the echo of online threats, the weight of eyes that never stopped watching. His grades slipped. Homework went unfinished. Test scores dropped. For the first time, numbers betrayed him. One afternoon, Ethan sat with him in the library. Textbooks spread across the table. "You've got to get back on top of this, man. You're smarter than half the teachers here. Don't let them drag you down." Marcus rubbed his temples. Exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "I can't think. Every time I try, I just hear them. See the comments. It's like they're in my head now." Ethan leaned forward, then drowned them out. "You've been proving people wrong your whole life. Don't stop now." But Marcus wasn't sure if he could. At night, the anxiety clawed at him. He lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Carter's voice. "I categorically deny that race played any role." Replay after replay, until it became louder than his own thoughts. The storm outside seeped inside. Angela tried everything. Long talks, hot tea, even pulling him away from screens. But Marcus was unraveling. One evening, she found him sitting at his desk, his notebook open but blank. "You've been staring at that page for an hour," she said softly. "I don't even know who I am anymore," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "Am I the smart kid? The joke? The victim? The hero? Everyone's decided for me. I don't feel like I get to decide anything." Angela's heart ached, but her voice was steady. "You're my son. That's who you are. And no headline, no teacher, no stranger on the internet gets to define that." Still, the weight pressed on him. The lowest moment came on a Friday morning. As Marcus walked into the cafeteria, a phone was shoved in front of his face. A boy sneered. "Hey genius, solve this problem for us." On the phone's screen was a fake math problem. Nonsense numbers strung together, designed to mock. Laughter exploded around the table. Marcus froze, his throat tight. The scene was too familiar, a cruel parody of the day that had changed everything. But this time, the laughter wasn't silenced by his brilliance. This time, it echoed freely, unbroken. He dropped his tray and left, the sound chasing him down the hall. By the weekend, Marcus shut himself in his room, barely speaking. His textbook sat unopened. His phone buzzed endlessly with notifications he no longer checked. Ethan visited, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "You're shutting down, man. You can't let them win like this." Marcus looked at him, his eyes hollow. "What if I already have?" Ethan had no answer. For Angela, watching her son collapse under the pressure was unbearable. She held him tighter at night, whispered prayers into the silence, begged for strength she wasn't sure she had. But just as the storm threatened to drown them completely, an unexpected light broke through. On Sunday evening, Angela's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was warm, authoritative. "This is Dr. Evelyn Clark," the caller said. "I'm a professor of mathematics at Stanford University. I've been following Marcus's story." Angela's breath caught. "Yes, this is his mother. I'd like to speak with Marcus," Dr. Clark continued. "I think he has potential far beyond what his current environment allows. I want to offer him mentorship, and if he's willing, I'd like him to visit campus. We can arrange everything." Angela's eyes filled with tears. She looked across the room at her son, slumped on the couch, lost in silence. For the first time in weeks, she saw a door opening where walls had closed. She handed Marcus the phone. His hands shook as he lifted it to his ear. "Hello?" His voice was barely above a whisper. On the other end, Dr. Clark's voice was steady. Kind. "Marcus, I've seen brilliance like yours before, but rarely at your age. Don't let the noise convince you otherwise. I want to help you see what you're truly capable of." Marcus's throat tightened. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered. His hand gripped the phone tighter, his pulse racing. A professor from Stanford, one of the best in the world, was offering him a lifeline. But accepting it would mean stepping even deeper into the spotlight he wasn't sure he could survive. Marcus sat on the couch, phone pressed to his ear, his heart hammering. Dr. Evelyn Clark's voice was calm, confident, and unlike the voices that had been surrounding him lately, it carried no trace of skepticism. "I don't say this lightly, Marcus," she said, "but I've read your work. I've seen how you handled yourself under pressure. You have a gift, and gifts like yours can't be ignored. They must be nurtured." He swallowed hard. "But I'm just a high school student." Dr. Clark chuckled softly. "Einstein was just a clerk once. The title doesn't matter. What matters is what your mind can do." Angela sat beside her son, her hand gripping his knee, as though grounding him in the moment. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a flicker of something he thought he'd lost: belief. They arranged to meet the following weekend in a quiet office at a nearby university, where Clark was giving a guest lecture. The days leading up were a blur of nerves. Marcus stayed up late, pulling out old notebooks, scribbling equations as though preparing for an exam no one had announced. When Saturday came, Angela drove him to the campus. The sprawling red brick buildings loomed like monuments, students bustling across lawns with books tucked under their arms. Marcus sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his palms slick. Angela reached over and squeezed his hand. "You belong here, Marcus. Don't forget that." Inside the math department, they found Dr. Clark waiting in a sunlit office. She was tall, elegant, with streaks of silver in her braided hair. Her presence was commanding yet warm, the kind that silenced a room without ever raising a voice. "Marcus," she greeted, extending her hand. "It's an honor to finally meet you." He shook her hand nervously, mumbling, "Thank you for wanting to meet me." She smiled, pulling out a folder from her desk. "I didn't come here to flatter you. I came here to see if what I saw in that video runs deeper than a single moment." Angela stood to the side, arms folded protectively, watching every detail. Clark spread papers across the desk. Problems filled the pages, dense, layered, the kind of mathematics that stretched far beyond anything in Marcus's high school curriculum. "I don't want memorized formulas," she said, her voice firm. "I want to see how you think. Take your time." Marcus sat down, his breath shallow. He picked up a pen, scanning the first problem. For a moment, panic surged. The numbers looked foreign, heavier than anything he'd worked through before. His throat tightened. But then he remembered nights at his desk, pushing himself past exhaustion to solve problems no teacher had asked of him. He remembered the silence after Carter's challenge, how the world had expected him to crumble, and how he had. He pressed the pen to the page. Minutes turned into an hour. His brow furrowed, his hand moving steadily, diagrams forming, notes scrawled. Clark stood silently, arms crossed, observing every stroke of the pen. She didn't offer hints or encouragement. She didn't need to. When Marcus finally set the pen down, his paper was filled with work proofs, solutions, explanations scribbled in neat lines. Clark stepped forward, scanning the pages carefully. Her eyes moved quickly, her brow rising slightly, as she reached the end. Then she placed the papers on the desk, folded her arms again, and looked directly at Marcus. "Do you know what you just did?" she asked. Marcus blinked nervously. "Did I get it wrong?" She shook her head slowly. "You solved problems most second-year undergraduates struggle with. Not perfectly. No one's perfect. But your reasoning, your persistence, it's rare. Very rare." Marcus stared at her, disbelief flickering across his face. "I'm good enough." Her voice softened. "Marcus, you're more than good enough. You're exceptional. And the world will try to convince you otherwise. Because boys like you aren't supposed to shine in rooms like this. But you just proved that you do." Angela's eyes glistened as she covered her mouth with her hand. For years she had told her son he was special. But now finally someone else was saying it. someone with authority, someone who could open doors. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. No teacher had ever spoken to him like this. No adult outside his mother had ever believed so fully. Clark leaned closer. But brilliance comes with responsibility. Right now, you're at the center of something bigger than yourself. Your story is being used to expose truths people don't want to face, and I have a choice to make, whether to let your story fade as a viral moment, or to make sure it changes something permanent. Marcus swallowed. What do you mean? I mean, Clark said, her voice steady. I want to make your case national. Not just the clip, not just Carter's mistake, but the whole story, systemic bias, overlooked talent, the cost of silence. If you're willing, I'll take this to academic conferences, national outlets, anywhere people will listen. Angela's eyes widened. National? Clark nodded. Marcus deserves more than a hashtag. He deserves opportunity, protection, recognition. But that only comes if we force people to see what they'd rather ignore. Marcus's stomach flipped. The idea of more cameras, more headlines, more judgment made his skin crawl. He thought of the online threats, the cafeteria laughter, the heavy silence of being both admired and hated. But then he remembered his mother's voice, firm and unwavering. Don't let them take your voice. And Clark's words, sharp and undeniable. You're exceptional. For the first time, Marcus realized he wasn't standing alone at the board anymore. He had allies, his mother, Ethan, and now Dr. Clark. He lifted his gaze, meeting Clark's eyes. If it helps other kids like me, then yes, let's do it. Clark's expression softened into pride. Good. Then this is only the beginning. Clark reached for her phone, dialing a contact. I'll make the first call tonight, she said. By next week your name won't just be trending. It'll be in the national conversation. Marcus's pulse quickened. The storm that had nearly broken him was about to grow larger than he could imagine. By the time the school board announced a public hearing, Jefferson High had become a battleground of whispers, headlines, and hashtags. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening, in the high school auditorium. But before the doors even opened, a line wrapped around the block. Parents clutched signs, students carried phones ready to live stream, and reporters crowded the entrance with cameras poised. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Folding chairs filled quickly, the walls lined with people standing shoulder to shoulder. At the front of the stage, a long table held the school board members, their expressions stiff and guarded. In the center sat Principal Harris, his tie too tight, his smile brittle. On one side of the room, Marcus and Angela sat together, Ethan nearby for support. Angela squeezed her son's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. Marcus wore a simple button-down shirt, his posture tense, his eyes scanning the restless crowd. On the opposite side, Mr. Carter sat with his lawyer, his face pale but composed. He avoided Marcus's gaze, staring instead at the papers neatly stacked before him. His jaw flexed as whispers rippled through the room at his presence. The chair of the board, Ms. Whitfield, tapped the microphone. This hearing will now come to order. We are here to address the allegations of misconduct regarding Mr. Carter's actions in his classroom and the subsequent viral attention. We ask that everyone remain respectful. A laugh erupted from the back, bitter, sharp. Respect? Where was that respect for Marcus? The audience erupted in murmurs until Whitfield banged her gavel. Order. Angela rose first. The board had given her 5 minutes to speak, but she carried decades of silence ready to spill. Her voice trembled at the start, but steadied quickly, growing stronger with each word. My son was not asked to solve that problem because of his ability. He was asked because his teacher assumed he would fail. That is not education. It is humiliation. And when Marcus succeeded, instead of celebrating his brilliance, this school tried to bury it. Applause broke out. Cheers. A chant began in the back. Let him speak. Let him speak. Angela turned, gesturing toward her son. Marcus, come stand with me. Marcus hesitated, his throat tight, but then he stood, walking slowly to the microphone. The room quieted, phones lifting higher to capture him. His palms were slick, his knees weak, but when he spoke his voice carried. I never wanted to be the center of this. I just wanted to be treated fairly. When I was called up, people laughed because they didn't think I could do it. Not because of the math, but because of who I am. I solved it anyway. And even after that, I was told it was luck. I've lived my whole life being told what I can't do. But that night, the world saw what I could. The crowd erupted again. Some standing, clapping. Others muttered, shaking their heads, their faces hard with resistance. Ms. Whitfield banged the gavel. Please. Order. Then it was Carter's turn. He stood stiffly, his lawyer whispering something in his ear before he stepped to the microphone. His eyes darted toward Marcus briefly, then away. I have dedicated 20 years to teaching students, Carter began, his voice sharp but defensive. What happened in my classroom has been grossly misrepresented. I did not make a racist joke. I did not intend to humiliate anyone. I challenged Marcus the same way I challenge other students. This narrative of racism is a distortion, spread online for clicks and attention. Boos erupted from the audience. Parents shouted, "Liar," and we saw the video. Carter raised his voice over the noise. You've seen a clip, not the full context. That moment was weaponized against me. My reputation is being destroyed by a misunderstanding. Angela stood abruptly, her voice cutting through the chaos. A misunderstanding? My son came home in tears. He heard your smirk, your tone, your disbelief. That wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a message. And every black child in that room heard it loud and clear. The crowd roared, divided, half applauding Angela, half shouting back in defense of Carter. A parent from the back stood, red-faced. This is political theater. Carter's a good teacher. You're just using race to ruin him. Another parent shouted in reply, good teachers don't humiliate kids. The board pounded their gavel again, but the room had fractured, the community's hidden divide now fully exposed. Shouts overlapped, some demanding Carter's resignation, others demanding Marcus stop playing victim. Marcus stood frozen at the center, his body vibrating with the weight of voices, pulling him in opposite directions. His story had become bigger than him, bigger than Carter, bigger than Jefferson High. It was no longer about one joke. It was about history, bias, the walls that had been invisible until now. Ms. Whitfield leaned into her microphone, her voice sharp. This board will review all testimony and evidence before making a decision. Until then, she was interrupted by a commotion near the side doors. A young woman pushed her way forward, clutching a laptop. She was a journalist, one of Lena Torres's colleagues, and her voice rang out above the noise. You want evidence? She shouted. I have it. The crowd fell into stunned silence. She connected her laptop to the projector. Emails appeared on the large screen at the front of the auditorium, messages pulled from Carter's school account. The subject lines alone were enough to send gasps rippling through the audience. These kids just don't have the discipline. Why bother pushing them? They'll never make it. Certain students just aren't cut out for advanced math. And in one email, directed privately to another teacher, every year it's the same. Kids like Marcus pretending they're smarter than they are. Eventually they crack. The room exploded. Shouts, boos, gasps, some people standing in shock, others filming furiously. Angela covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face, not from surprise, but from painful validation. She had always known. Now the proof was on the screen. Marcus's hands shook at his sides. He wasn't just fighting Carter's smirk anymore. He was staring at a trail of words that confirmed what he had always felt, but could never prove. Carter's face drained of color. His lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but the damage was done. The crowd roared with outrage. As the board members scrambled, Ms. Whitfield banged her gavel helplessly. Order, order, but the auditorium was past order. Marcus stood at the center of a storm, now undeniable. The world had just seen Carter's mask ripped away, and there was no going back. The emails still glowed on the auditorium's projector screen. When the board hastily adjourned the hearing, parents shouted over one another, some demanding Carter's immediate firing, others storming toward the exits in fury at what they saw as a witch hunt. Security escorted Carter out through a side door, his lawyer shielding him from cameras as microphones chased after him. For Marcus, the sound of voices blurred into a low roar. He stood beside his mother, his body rigid, his mind spinning. It should have felt like victory. The truth had finally been exposed. But instead, all he felt was exhaustion. That night the news broke. Jefferson High teachers suspended amid racism scandal. Reporters replayed the hearing on a loop. Carter's face pale as the emails flashed behind him. The school board issued a brief statement. Effective immediately, Mr. Carter has been suspended pending further investigation. We remain committed to creating a safe learning environment for all students. At first, Marcus's phone lit up with congratulations. Friends texted, "You did it, man," and justice served. Strangers online hailed him as brave, a symbol of change. But within hours, another current of commentary emerged. Suspended. That's too harsh. So now teachers get punished for pushing kids? Political correctness gone mad. He didn't even say anything racist in class. The divide grew sharper than ever. Carter's supporters launched their own hashtag on Stand with Carter. They painted him as a victim of cancel culture, a good teacher destroyed by overreaction. At school, the atmosphere grew unbearable. Students whispered, as Marcus passed, some nodding in solidarity, others glaring with open resentment. Ethan tried to shield him, intercepting sneers with sharp comebacks. But even he couldn't block everything. In math class, a substitute teacher filled Carter's seat. The woman smiled nervously, calling Marcus brilliant every time he answered, her tone almost performative. Marcus shrank in his chair. The attention felt like another kind of spotlight, one he hadn't asked for. At lunch, Derek muttered loudly enough for Marcus to hear. Guess you can get teachers fired if you cry hard enough. Laughter erupted around the table. Marcus clenched his fists, but kept walking. His victories felt paper-thin when the people around him refused to acknowledge them. At home, Angela tried to celebrate. She cooked his favorite meal, macaroni baked with sharp cheddar, collard greens on the side. She set the table with a candle, telling him, "Baby, this is progress. You showed them the truth." But Marcus pushed food around his plate, his appetite gone. What good is the truth if half the people don't believe it? Angela's fork froze midair. They don't have to believe it. The proof is there. Marcus looked up, his eyes tired. Then why do I still feel like nothing changed? The question hung between them, heavy with centuries of echoes. In the days that followed, journalists framed the story as a debate. Some praised Marcus for exposing systemic bias. Others lamented the ruin of a career. Talk shows invited pundits who argued endlessly. Was Carter racist? Was the punishment too much? Was Marcus just a symbol of oversensitivity? For Marcus, the noise was suffocating. His face appeared on screens across the country, but rarely did anyone speak of his actual brilliance. They spoke of what he represented, of what his story meant for education, for race, for politics. He was no longer a student. He was a headline. One night, Ethan sat with him in his room, flipping through channels until Carter's face appeared again on a panel show. A commentator said, "What we're seeing here is a young man being manipulated into thinking he's a victim." Ethan slammed the remote down. "This is insane. They're twisting everything." Marcus stared at the screen. "What if they're right? What if I am just a victim?" Ethan turned sharply. "No, you're not. Victims get silenced. You spoke. You proved yourself. That's not weakness. That's power." But Marcus wasn't convinced. Power didn't feel this heavy. At school the next week, Principal Harris called him into the office again. His tone was clipped, his smile gone. "I hope you understand, Marcus," Harris said. "The board is under tremendous pressure. Suspending Mr. Carter hasn't quieted the storm. It's only fueled it. Some of our donors, our parents, even faculty are unhappy. They think this went too far." Marcus sat frozen, his backpack heavy on his shoulders. "So what are you saying?" Harris leaned forward, his voice low. "I'm saying don't expect this suspension to feel like justice. It was a decision made to protect the school, not necessarily you." Marcus's throat tightened. Even now, even with proof, the institution's loyalty wasn't with him. When he left the office, Angela was waiting outside. She saw the slump in his shoulders, the dullness in his eyes. "What did he say?" Marcus shook his head. "That it's not really about me." Angela pulled him close, wrapping him in her arms. "Baby, it's always been about you. They just don't want to admit it." But as days passed, Marcus's doubt grew louder. Was Carter's suspension justice, or was it just tokenism, an action taken to appease the crowd, not to change the system? Even his supporters online seemed restless. Some demanded Carter be fired immediately. Others urged Marcus to use his platform for broader change. "Don't stop now," they wrote. "Speak for all of us." Marcus felt trapped. He was 16. He wanted to do his homework, play basketball with Ethan, joke about music and movies. Instead, he was being pushed into a role he wasn't sure he could carry. Spokesperson, activist, symbol. The weight pressed down until he barely recognized himself. Then on a rainy Thursday evening, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table staring blankly at a half-finished essay, Angela's phone buzzed. She answered, her brows lifting in surprise. "Yes, this is Marcus's mother," she said cautiously. "Who's calling?" Her eyes widened. She mouthed a word Marcus couldn't hear, then handed him the phone. "It's for you." Marcus lifted the receiver hesitantly. "Hello?" A polished voice spoke on the other end. "Marcus Reed? This is Dr. Michael Hanley. I'm coordinating a national education conference next month in Washington, D.C. We've been following your story. We'd like you to speak on a panel about equity in education." Marcus's pulse quickened. "Speak? At a conference?" "Yes," Hanley replied smoothly. "Your experience has sparked national dialogue. We believe your voice could inspire educators across the country. All expenses covered, of course." Marcus stared at the email again. The words still surreal. "We'd like you to speak at the National Education Equity Conference." It was official. A 16-year-old from Jefferson High, the same kid who once tried to blend into the back of classrooms, was now being asked to speak to leaders, teachers, and students from across the country. The weight of it pressed heavy. Nights leading up to the event, Marcus barely slept. He'd sit at his desk, a blank notebook in front of him, trying to write his speech. Every time the pen touched paper, his hand froze. What could he say that would matter? What could he say that wouldn't drown under the noise of politics, opinions, and online cruelty? Angela noticed the hesitation. One night she stood in the doorway, watching her son wrestle with silence. "Baby," she said softly, "you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest. That's all people need to hear." Marcus exhaled shakily. "But what if they don't believe me? What if they twist it like they always do?" Angela walked in, placing her hands on his shoulders. "Then let them. But someone out there, some kid who feels invisible, some mother who feels hopeless, will hear you, and for them it'll mean everything." Her words steadied him. He picked up the pen again and began to write, not speeches polished like politicians, but truths raw and unshakable. He wrote about the chalk trembling in his hand, about the laughter that cut deeper than any blade, about the silence that came not from respect, but from disbelief. The morning of the conference arrived. Washington, D.C. buzzed with energy, as delegates, educators, and students filled the vast hall. Bright lights bathed the stage, where banners read, "National Education Equity Conference." Marcus sat backstage, palms damp, the folded speech heavy in his pocket. Through the curtain, he could see hundreds of faces, teachers in pressed suits, students with wide eyes, cameras flashing as reporters prepared to broadcast. Beside him, Angela whispered, "Remember where you started, and remember why you are here." When his name was announced, Marcus Reed, student Jefferson High, the applause thundered. Marcus walked onto the stage, each step slow, deliberate. The lights blinded him at first, but then he saw them, rows of students leaning forward, waiting, teachers holding pens, ready to take notes. And suddenly the stage didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a board waiting for chalk. He took the microphone, his hand trembling the way it had with chalk months ago. He glanced down at his notes, then folded the paper and set it aside. His voice carried without them. "I never thought I'd be standing here. I never thought I'd be standing anywhere. Because for most of my life, I was taught, silently, through looks, through skipped hands, through smirks, that kids like me weren't supposed to belong in certain spaces. We weren't supposed to answer questions right. We weren't supposed to shine." The room hushed. Marcus continued, his voice steadying. "One day, my teacher made me the punchline of a joke. He asked me to solve a problem he thought I couldn't. The whole class laughed. Phones came out, ready to record me fail. And in that moment, with chalk trembling in my hand, I felt smaller than I ever had before." He paused, scanning the audience. Some nodded, others already wiping at their eyes. "But here's what I've learned. Sometimes the world waits for you to fail, because it's easier than admitting they were wrong about you. And the only way to break that is to prove them wrong anyway." Applause rippled through the crowd, but Marcus pressed on. "I didn't change that day, because I solved a problem. I changed because I refused to let that joke define me. And when the truth went public, when people saw what happened, it wasn't just about math anymore. It was about every student who's ever been told they're not good enough, every voice that's been silenced, every hand that's been ignored." He glanced down briefly, his voice tightening. "But I also learned something else. Victory doesn't feel like victory when half the world still denies it. When they call you lucky, or a liar, or worse, and it hurts. It hurts more than I can explain. But the pain doesn't erase the truth. It only proves why the truth matters." The audience sat motionless, hanging on every word. Marcus gripped the microphone tighter. Is trembling gone now? I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm not here because of politics. I'm here because I don't want another kid to sit in a classroom, trembling with chalk in their hand, waiting to be laughed at. I'm here because silence never saved me. And it won't save them either. The room erupted in applause, sustained, powerful, echoing through the hall. Teachers rose to their feet, students cheered, cameras flashed as reporters captured the image of Marcus Reed, standing tall, microphone in hand, the light catching the edges of his determined face. Angela watched from the front row, tears streaming, her heart bursting with pride. For years she had carried the pain of invisibility, the weight of being underestimated. Now, her son stood as living proof that silence could be broken, that brilliance could be undeniable. As the applause died down, Marcus lifted the microphone once more. His voice softened, almost like he was speaking to each person individually. I started this journey with chalk trembling in my hand. But now I'm holding this microphone, and I'm not afraid anymore. The crowd surged again, some shouting his name, others chanting for change. The energy was electric, alive, uncontainable. Marcus stepped back, his chest heaving, the weight of his words still settling over him. He had come full circle from humiliation to redemption, from invisibility to being heard. But as the lights dimmed slightly, the narrator's voice cut in over the footage of Marcus standing at the podium, his figure framed against the glowing conference banner. The tone was sharp, direct, meant not just for the room but for everyone watching beyond it. We've seen what one boy did when laughter tried to bury him. We've seen how he turned a joke into a lesson for the world. But the question remains, if you were in Marcus's place, standing at that board with chalk trembling in your hand, what would you have done? The screen faded to black, leaving the audience not just in the hall, but at home, sitting with the uncomfortable, urgent question: would they have laughed, stayed silent, or stood with Marcus? When one student's courage exposed the truth, it wasn't just his victory, it was a reminder that silence protects injustice. If this story moved you, don't let it fade. Type yes if you believe every voice deserves to be heard, and subscribe if this broke your heart.